I wanted to spend my few minutes talking about what MS is, but stress the very high incidence of MS in the Northwest, and then tell you a little bit more about what we do. I left up here on the table a few of our chapter brochures. Feel free to take one. I also left a few of our program guides. So if you know someone with multiple sclerosis and you think they are not connected to us, and it doesn't matter whether they live here or in New York City, we are a nationwide organization with chapters, a total of 37 chapters, but we serve the entire country. You can always feel free to call me and I'll connect you with the right chapter, or you can go online. So be sure the programs and services we offer in our chapter are more extensive than some chapters in the country because we raise a lot of money and because the incidence of MS is so high here. But feel free to take one of those. And then I also have some Walk MS posters. Walk MS in Tacoma at Chambers Bay is on Saturday, April 11th. Chris is participating as a board member, so if you have questions, feel free to talk to Chris. You can also take one of the little trading cards. I put some on all the tables, and that tells you how you can go online and register. The walk is free. There is no registration fee. We ask and suggest a minimum of $50, but we don't bill people if they don't give anything. It is a huge event. In Tacoma, there will probably be about 1,000 walkers, maybe more than that. But then there's probably 200 volunteers that it takes to put on the walk. So it's a big event down here. And for the chapter, it raises over $2 million. We have 24 walks in our chapter community. If any of you have any questions, I'll leave some time at the end. I'm not sure I can answer them, but if I can't, I will get an answer and get it to you. So what is MS? MS is a disease, a chronic disease of the nervous system. It is an autoimmune disease. People are generally diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 50. We used to say 20 to 40, but now we've spread the gap to 50. But like Chris's mom was diagnosed older than 50, and most of the time when people are diagnosed in their 50s or later, if they think back over the course of their life, there was an onset of MS earlier on that was not diagnosed. MS is very, very hard to diagnose because it comes and goes. So someone can literally go to bed in the evening and feel great, and they can wake up in the morning and they can be blind. It's because optic neuritis has set in, but then they'll get their vision back. Or they can wake up in the morning and have one whole side numb, or one arm, or one leg. Probably the most common thing that happens with multiple sclerosis is fatigue, and the fatigue is overwhelming. It's not like I didn't sleep very well last night. It's a fatigue where people just can't function at all. It's just I don't have MS, and so I can't really understand it. But in talking with all the people I have over the years with MS, you begin to grasp how it just stops you in your tracks. There's lots of other symptoms, and because they come and go, and because they can be associated with so many other diseases, it makes MS so much harder to diagnose. Years ago, MS was diagnosed only through a spinal tap. Today, it is most commonly diagnosed with MRIs. And what they see on MRIs is lesion on the brain and the spinal cord. And more, especially MS neurologists, can predict at some certainty how the person is going to be affected. So where the lesions are it often tells how the person's debilitation is going to take place. There's really 4 different kinds of multiple sclerosis. Most people are diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS, which means they have an onset or an exacerbation, as it's called, and then they revert to being almost the same as they were. The word almost is what's critical, but they go back and forth. Some people have one onset and may not have another one for 5 years. Other people have an onset and it lasts quite a while. But this is typically what happens. It starts with relapsing remitting. What happens, though, is it flips into progressive MS. And when it goes to progressive MS, then there's no going back to almost where you were. You just continually get worse. Some people with multiple sclerosis, you would never know they have MS. They have no physical symptoms, but the symptoms they have are terrible. So the main one is cognitive problems, memory problems, and what makes that so challenging is because people are diagnosed in the prime of life, when they are very successful in their careers, when they're raising families, when, you know, life is being pretty good. But because of the hidden potential effects of MS, they fear telling their employer. We do a lot of work with employment and supporting people maybe who need to go on SSDI, or maybe who need counseling on how to inform their employer and how to get accommodations from their employer. And unfortunately, some employers don't do a good job of accommodating, so then people lose their jobs, and then they go into financial trouble, and then they have the extremely high co-pays on disease-modifying therapies. So with multiple sclerosis, back in the early 90s, there were no treatments for multiple sclerosis at all. You would be diagnosed, and the physician would say, you know, go home and live your best life. It was often called the disease of diagnose and adios. In the mid-90s, therapies started coming into light. All of the therapies until the last couple of years, there's now 12 therapies. All of the therapies until the last couple of years were injections. One drug is daily, another drug is 3 times a week, another drug is once a month. Some of the treatments are secondary uses. For example, one of the treatments is a chemotherapeutic agent, but it was originally used in certain kinds of cancer, and then is discovered as a secondary effect to use in multiple sclerosis. Now there are a couple of oral therapies. Physicians are somewhat reluctant to put patients on oral therapies just because. Patients, of course, all want to go on an oral therapy. I mean, imagine what a relief it would be to not have to give yourself a shot once a day or 3 times a week or whatever is prescribed. But physicians don't feel we know enough yet about the effects of the oral drug. So they are definitely given to people who just don't have any injection sites left, or who just can't deal with the injections, or who have taken a drug that has reached its max, because there's certain drugs you can only take for so many years or so many doses before you have to go off that therapy. So the cause is not known, and we don't have a cure. With every treatment therapy that comes in, we get a little closer to understanding the disease more, but we're definitely not there yet. I mentioned that MS is diagnosed between the age range of 20 and 50. There are twice as many women with multiple sclerosis as men, and we don't know why. MS is a very Northern European disease. We don't know why. but the incidence of MS in the Northwest is higher than almost anywhere in the world. We don't know why. It's much less common in Asians, Afro-Americans, and other populations than Caucasians. There are theories around MS, none that have definitely been proved, but there's a genetic factor involved. Where you live as a child has some effect. So, and if you live in the Northwest as a young child and you move away versus living away and moving to the Northwest in your early days, your chances of getting multiple sclerosis are higher. But again, we don't know why. There's clear indications around vitamin D deficiency, which of course we don't have as much sun here as in other parts of the country. Doctors also, for a period of time, physicians, once we knew this, were prescribing supplemental vitamin D to people, but physicians, MS neurologists particularly, and researchers are very clear that the effect of supplemental vitamin D is not as good as sunlight. But then, of course, the challenge with the sunlight is skin cancers and all these other things. So, you know, where's the balance? We really don't know. Chris mentioned our geography of our chapter. I am reminded too often that we have 22% of the land mass of the United States in our chapter. We raise over $7.5 million a year. A percentage of that money, about 40%, goes to research, and the rest of the money is used for programs and services such as employment support, and we do home adaptations to keep people in their homes longer. We do counseling. I mean, many of these services are outsourced to vendors that we have contracts with. For some people, it's as simple as being diagnosed or being tentatively diagnosed, and where do I go see a doctor that really knows MS and can make conclusions and prescribe a treatment. In Tacoma, the MS hub, so to speak, is at Multicare. Dr. John Huddlestone and a group through Multicare see a lot of MS, but there are also some other independent neurologists in Tacoma and around South Sound here that see a lot of MS. And then if people choose, like for Chris's mom, she was seen by a non-MS neurologist, and they chose a second opinion and went to one of the MS centers in Seattle. There are 4 very big, very well nationally recognized MS centers in Seattle. One is through Swedish at Swedish Cherry Hill. One is at the University of Washington, and it's actually housed at Northwest Hospital. Third one is at Evergreen Hospital in Kirkland. And the 4th one is at Virginia Mason, and they have dedicated MS centers. And so, again, I encourage you, if somebody is struggling with their MS or possibly has MS, see a specialist before you move forward, because, like in Chris's mom's treatment, she was going to have a procedure that when Chris told me, I said, oh, yikes, you've just got to go see a specialist. I mean, I'm not a physician and I don't diagnose, but having been around this disease so long and known so many professionals, there's certain things that just don't sound right, and you certainly don't want people to go through things like spinal taps if they don't need to. One of the ways MS research is funded is through NIH, but the biggest nonprofit organization funding MS research is the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. So last year we funded $52 million. A lot of the research we do is pilot work. So before NIH will fund projects, there has to be some proof of theory. Well, the problem is somebody's got to fund getting that scientist to where they can get NIH money. So we do a lot of that work. Our research is focused in basically 3 ways: to stop MS, restore it in its tracks, and end MS forever. So those are the 3 focuses. We have devoted a lot of time to relapsing remitting MS, and a couple of years ago we went out to people with MS that are in our database and said, do you want us to do anything else? Where else do you want us to focus? And it came back loud and clear, what about the people with progressed disease? Because we really weren't doing anything, and there are no treatments for progressive MS. All the treatments that we have are in relapsing remitting. So now we're getting deep into progressive MS. And then the other area is health and wellness, because there are a lot of people who have certain diets, certain exercise programs, different kinds of things, and they're doing well. They might be doing well because they're one of the lucky ones, but they might also be doing well because of what they're doing. So those are the areas that we're focused on. How can you help? One way is to support our walk that's in your local community. Another way is to talk with Chris, who chairs the local Volunteer Leadership Council, that is all about building awareness and raising money, primarily through Walk MS, and then we have a bike ride, a 2-day bike ride in Mount Vernon, and so the bike and the walk. And then this year they had their first fundraising event to try to grow a presence down here. It was called Taste of Hope, and it was in February. It was actually here. One of the biggest, I think actually the biggest funder of the establishment of this art museum was Lillian and Christian Hobb, and they are very connected to the National MS Society, and in fact led a big research project. So I have talked to them about actually coming out for the February 2016 Taste of Hope next year, and I think they're probably going to come. So with those remarks, I'll open up to questions if you have any. Not sure that I can answer them, but I'll get answers for you. Or comment. Yes?
The Northwest is, as you said, is high incidence. Is Alaska included in that as well?
No, not. It's so in our chapter we have about, now MS is not a reported communicable disease, so the only people we know living with MS are people that have self-disclosed to us, have called us, said they have MS, want to get on our mailing list. But there are 12,000 people in Washington with MS. There are about 1,000 in Alaska and about 1,500 in Montana. So you can see, and the rest are in northern Idaho. Yeah. Yes?
We know what chemotherapy does for people with cancer. And when you talk about the injections and when that's prescribed for a person with MS, what does that do for them? Does it help with their symptoms? Does it go against the lesion? What do they?
It hope in some people it doesn't work, but in some people it stops the progression of the disease or slows it down. So people are checked typically every year with an MRI to see if they have more lesions. Sometimes a person will know they're probably going to have more lesions because they see the disease progressing, but other times their symptoms don't change, but they do develop more lesions. So the hope with chemotherapeutic agent and the other ones is to slow the addition of lesions. Anything else? Uh-huh.
Is there a typical time frame involved, or does the disease progress at different rates in different people?
It definitely progresses at different rates in different people. So I can think of a couple of people that I know well who were diagnosed in the 80s before we ever had any drugs. And they're now people that are 60 plus. And one of them is doing terrible. The disease has progressed. He's in an electric chair. He basically has no mobility from the waist down. And his lesions would say that that's where his MS is going to progress. Another person still looks fine, but cognitively he's really declining, and he knows it. But we don't know why. And in both cases they were diagnosed before there were drugs. And in both cases there's still a disease.